Change is a process to be embraced, not to be feared. I think the biggest reason why we're so afraid of change is because we hold on to what's familiar for us. We're so afraid of the obstacles that we see in front of us that we'd rather run back to where we used to be, where things were comfortable, how we're so used to things being, the structures that we so readily understand, we don't have to think about. But in this new future that God is trying to bring us into, now we have to start trusting. Now we have to start hoping and having faith. Things aren't expected anymore. In fact, the unexpected is what comes through. When we look at the examples of the Israelites in the desert, the Israelites, they didn't want to go to the promised land when they realized that there were giants there. They sent out scouts and they realized, okay, there are these big walls, these big giants. Even though this land is beautiful and fruitful, and God promised it to our ancestors for hundreds of years, we don't want to go because we see obstacles there. We would rather go back to Egypt, back to our slavery, what we're familiar with. We should have died there instead of dying here at the promised land. And I think it's very, very similar for a lot of us today. We would rather go back to what we're familiar with, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's slavery, even if it's not what we wanted, because we're too afraid of failing in a future that we couldn't have expected. We're too afraid of trusting God again. And what's familiar, it's easy to not trust God. You trust more in the structure that you're used to, the day-by-day things. Like for the Israelites, they would get up, work, eat, sleep. It was a constant cycle. But with God in the desert, well, they had to trust him every single day. God sent his spirit in the form of a cloud for the Israelites, and whenever the cloud moved, the Israelites would have to move. They'd have to trust God every single day. There was no fixed structure. When God gave them food, manna from heaven, it was new every single day, so they couldn't over prepare for the next day and stock it up, and they couldn't rely on what they had yesterday. It was new every single time, and that change is what they were afraid of. The obstacles in front of them is what they were afraid of. They magnified the problems, and by magnifying the problems, they took their eyes off of God. When we look at Peter, for example, it's the same sort of situation. When Peter was walking on the water, he was breaking the laws of physics, and he's walking on the water, defying physics itself. And instead of focusing his eyes on the creator of the universe, Jesus, who called him out onto the water, he focused his eyes on the storm that was around him, the circumstances he saw, the things he was unfamiliar with. And that's what worried him. That's when he started to doubt. That's when he sank. He took his eyes off of Jesus, who gave him the power, and he called him, and he took his eyes onto the problem. He was so frightened, he would have rather been back at that boat than walking on the water with Jesus. And it sounds crazy to us, but most of us are going through the exact same thing. How many of us are running away from the future God wants for us because we're holding on to the past that we're familiar with? For the Israelites, it was slavery. For Peter, it was the boat. So what is it for you? What is it that you're so familiar with? Why have you become familiar with failure and comfortable with disappointment? It's because you don't want to trust God. It takes faith. It's not easy. It wasn't easy for Peter to keep his eyes fixed on Jesus when the storms around him are roaring. It wasn't easy for the Israelites to go into the promised land when there were giants there, walls bigger than they've ever seen before. They had to trust God. But God doesn't ask us to go into these promised lands and walk on the water because it's easy. He doesn't ask us to go into the fire because he doesn't know how hot it is. He asks us to go in because he wants us to trust in him. When the Israelites were worried, God told them, remember what I did for you in Egypt. If I could send the 10 plagues, if I could split the Red Sea, then I can certainly do this for you now. With Peter, all Peter had to do was recognize, okay, sure, the storm around me is crazy, and this is a crazy situation. All the disciples are screaming for their lives, and they're wondering how this is even possible. But maybe, just maybe, it would be wiser for me to trust in Jesus, who created the universe, over the creation itself. But Peter trusted more in the power of the water that Jesus created than in the Creator himself. In the same way, you're trusting more in your inability than in God's ability. You're telling God you can't go into that future because you aren't ready. You aren't perfect enough. God isn't asking you to be perfect. God wasn't waiting for the Israelites to grow taller to match the giants. God wasn't waiting for Peter to get this crazy boldness first. He just asked him to walk, to have faith first and see later. That's what he asked him to do. Like Paul says, we walk by faith and not by sight. He's asking you to have faith in him first. So he's not asking you to be perfect. He's not asking you to be ready. He's not asking you to see it before you believe it. He's asking you to believe it before you see it, to follow him while you are unprepared. That's what he's asking you to do. He doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. When David was walking up to Goliath, to fight Goliath, he wasn't thinking about the greatness of the giant. He was not thinking about the greatness of himself, his own swing when he swung the rock. He was thinking about the greatness of God. That's why he ran and no one else did. That's why he fought Goliath and no one else did. Even with all the other soldiers that were there, everyone else, he's the one who fought Goliath. And it's because the faith he had in God. He forgot about what was familiar to him. David was so used to being isolated, mocked, disregarded, overlooked, and seen as insignificant. But he forgot about all of that and trusted in his God, who was significant, who had prevailed. When David was talking to Goliath, he wasn't boasting about how big he was or undermining how big Goliath was. He boasted in God. Like Paul says, if you're going to boast in anything, boast in God. He boasted in the power of his God. That's why Goliath fell. So if you take the steps of faith, even when you aren't ready, you will watch your giants fall. This is why Jesus said, the faith of the mustard seed makes mountains move. The same mountains that you're so afraid of in your life will move when you have faith. Faith doesn't mean waiting idly by for your dreams to happen. Faith means taking the steps God has asked you to take. Obeying him, even if it's hard. Walking into that promised land. Walking into the fire. Stepping on the water. That is what Jesus is asking you to do. So the only question is, are you going to follow him? Are you going to trust more in God's calling? Or are you going to trust in your inability? Are you going to look at your track record or his track record? Which one are you going to actually trust? Which one are you going to follow? Yourself or him? That's the question you have to ask. It's not about will it happen. Anything is possible for the person who believes. Jesus said that. It's not about whether he can do it. It's about, are you going to actually answer the call? You're chosen, sure, but are you going to answer the call? He's stretching his hand out to you. You couldn't climb up the mountain, so he climbed down to reach you. But the only question is, will you take his hand, or are you going to throw him away again? Are you going to disregard him because you think you can't do it? Are you going to hold on to the pride that says you have to do it all by yourself? It's almost as if you want the excuse. It's almost as if you want to say you can't do it. It's almost as if you want the idea of needing to be ready first before you do it, because you know you'll never truly be ready. You know you'll never be perfect. You know that, and that's why you're running away from it. You're using that as an excuse, but God is saying you have no excuse, because it's not about you being perfect already. It's about you answering his call. So let go of the excuses, let go of the doubt, and trust in God who calls you. He won't fail you. If he's never failed anyone else before, why would he start with you? God bless you.